Welcome to Sex Help for Smart People. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Jurgens, former science professor turned somatic sexologist and intimacy coach. This podcast is all about using evidence-based practices to help high-achieving women and their partners of all genders get the affection, connection, and great sex you want. So let's get at it. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 5. This is going to be an epic one. We are talking today about getting to know your core desires and the erotic emotions that you crave that will help you feel deeply satisfied. So we're talking today about the psychological side of sexual desire. We're going to geek out a little bit, and there's going to be a bit of theory. We're going to talk about emotions. So gird yourself, friends. It's going to be great. It's also going to be a lot. So you may need to pause occasionally or come back to it. But this is a really important one, especially for any of you who struggle maybe thinking about how to ask for what you want, how to even know what you want, how to ask your partners what they want, or if you get freaked out sometimes by the things that turn you on. This is definitely going to be for you, but I think it's kind of for everyone. So we're going to cover the emotions we crave to help us feel really turned on, which is what we call core desires, and what they are, why we have the ones we have, and how to find yours. So it's a big topic. I'm going to break it all down as much as possible. And that term, so core desires, comes from the Somatic Institute, which is one of my certifying agencies. And I think it's a really great descriptor of the emotions, these erotic emotions that we really want to feel during sex. But just remember, when we're talking about core desires, we're talking about emotions, not actions. The emotions that we want to feel, and that sometimes certain actions or imaginings can help us feel. This whole topic is really near and dear to my heart because it's so empowering. It was empowering for me. It's also empowering for every single one of my clients when they discover these things about themselves. And I'm so excited to share it with you today. So when we think about turn-ons in our culture, we typically don't get past assumptions into the actual mechanics, right? Like, how does turn-on really happen? So we know, well, many of us know, some of us don't know, that the brain is the biggest sex organ we've got. And our psychological and emotional needs for arousal are actually incredibly profound and really important to our sexuality. So we don't really get taught how real, intense adult turn-on actually happens or how to cultivate it. And that's what we're going to do today, right? And I'm not talking about those sorts of uncontrollable high school urges that, that really like, what is happening? Why am I so horny kind of feeling that you get sometimes in your 20s. And I'm not talking about looks or sex acts or hot bods per se, right? And of course, everybody can get those kind of uncontrollable physical urges no matter what age you are, right? But it's just really common when you're younger. But what we're talking about is this type of psychological arousal that happens when you get to feel the emotions that really support your own unique erotic mind. And these ones, oh boy, they can really pack a punch. They can really turn us on. And they can also give us, when we fulfill them, this deep sense of satisfaction. Because this is underlying our sexuality is what we're really longing to feel during any sort of erotic experience, oftentimes subconsciously. But when we actually learn to bring them into consciousness, what ours are, what our core desires are and help us figure out how to get these desires fulfilled more consciously, it's incredibly empowering. And we'll talk about ways to use this information at the end of the episode. So one thing to know is that as far as we can tell, and it's not well studied in people who identify as asexual, but for most everybody else, we know that everybody seems to have these. Everybody seems to have erotic emotions and these core desires. And I'm sure ace people have other ways of seeking fulfillment for these emotional desires too. It just might not be through sexuality. But for most of us, these core desires we have are incredibly consistent through our lives, and kind of surprisingly so. And to be clear, our fantasies or actual desired real life experiences can absolutely change. And most of us, they change all the time. But the underlying feelings we're seeking through those experiences, that we use those experiences or imaginings to reach, those don't actually change much. So why is that, right? It's a really good question, and one I wondered myself back when I was learning this. And I'm going to give you the really short version, because we could go into all kinds of psychological theory about this. But the short version is that eroticism is adult play. And play is really important for all kinds of animals. An erotic play for adults is one way that the human mind offers healing to old emotional wounds we acquired earlier in life. So this kind of blew my mind when I found out about it, but it makes a ton of sense. We use erotic play to give ourselves some things we didn't get emotionally once upon a time. And this can happen either subconsciously, which it usually does for quite a long time in our lives, or when, after, say, listening to a podcast about it, you learn about it and start working with yours, it can become something that you are more consciously able to direct and enable yourself to get fulfilled. So, before we go any further with erotic emotions, we're going to take a quick turn into what the heck are emotions themselves. So it really helps to get underneath the hood here and understand what their purpose is and where they come from in order for you to understand what's going on with your erotic emotions. So all emotions, just talking about any sort of emotions, we all have them, right? We feel them all the time. And sometimes we suppress them all the time. I know I used to a lot, but I'm using emotions and feelings interchangeably here today. And what they are is they are chemical cascades that are triggered by our perceptions, either consciously or subconsciously, and they are meant to motivate action. This is how emotions work in animals. We are animals. So sometimes there will be a conscious thought that initiates emotions. And a particular emotion usually attached to a particular thought. Or they can be more automated subconscious perceptions that initiate emotions. So then there's a chemical cascade in the body, and we feel it as physical sensations. So here's an example. Maybe we see a car coming for us in the crosswalk. There's like a lightning fast, you may not even detect it, kind of, oh shit, thought in there somewhere. It might not even have words, right? Because we're so good at perceiving danger. But we've seen the car, right? We perceived the danger consciously. We might also perceive danger unconsciously. For example, when we hear a loud noise, it might be an automated, our nervous system has an automated response that there could be something dangerous. So even if nothing's going to hurt us, we can have the same flood of chemicals from the perception of danger and the same body sensations. Both are meant to motivate self-preservation action in this example, right? But people often confuse thoughts and emotions. So we say things like, I feel like I am in danger. Well, that's actually a thought. I am in danger is a thought. The actual feeling would be something like scared, afraid, right? And a good way to check to see if something is an emotion or feeling is to see if you can describe it in one word. So examples are, there's so many examples, loads and loads of emotions, right? But some examples are things like beloved, content, proud, enraged, ashamed, rebellious, excited, grateful, wanted, right? There's a million. There's so many. So just to illustrate some more, you can imagine the sensation of feeling nervous, right? Everybody's had that moment of feeling nervous. And everybody's experience in their body is going to be a little bit different, sometimes really different. And you might feel nervousness as a fluttering in the belly, for example. I've heard that described a lot. For me, I have a tendency to have a load of tension in my shoulders and my butt, and a sense of like this kind of like rapid, fluttery energy in my limbs and my hands. Sometimes if you feel really angry, you might feel something like energy wanting to kind of move your arms and legs, or you may feel hot in your face, right? So these are just sensations associated with our emotions. And so this is a whole topic, and I work with clients all the time in learning how to process emotions instead of repressing them and all kinds of fun stuff. But what's really important today is just to know that different emotions have different sensations in the body. Some of them we find particularly delicious. Like we just really like them. And we tend to pursue those emotions. You know, I really love the feeling of wonder. Like that is just, I think that's such a fun emotion to feel. And I love to stand by, say, something like, you know, a beautiful view of the ocean or a starry night sky and just feel all this wonder. Sometimes I can feel it in all kinds of, you know, small little scenarios, and I just let myself feel it because it feels wonderful to me. And erotic emotions, our core desires, are the emotions we really crave feeling through our sexuality because they feel, for some reason, to us, particularly delicious. And we'll get to what those reasons are. And also just know that different scenarios generate different emotions for different people. So you could have the same scene play out, but it will generate different emotions for different people. Okay, so we're going to go back to erotic emotions, and I'm going to explain where they come from in particular. Because before we get to yours and how to find them, you need to know a little bit of the theory behind this. And I think it will be clear why, so that you can kind of interpret what you learn about yourself. Okay, so the theory behind this, and this is outlined really well in a book by Jack Morin called The Erotic Mind. If you want to totally geek out and have a deep dive, that's where to go. To have a slightly less deep dive, but a really wonderful, wonderful introduction to this and a wonderful book, you can check out the book Coming Together by the Somatica founders, one of my training agencies. And that book is by Danielle Harrell and Celeste Hirschman. But I'm going to give you all of the information you need today, and you can always reference those if you want to just dive deeper. All right. So we all have these sort of formative relational wounds. And that's just normal. It's nothing to be afraid of or terrified about or judge yourself about. Just to be aware of, every single human has them. So we don't get through life without taking some knocks, right? And we don't get through life without sometimes getting hurt. But they do inform how we play as adults and what feels really good to us. So there are two pathways that we understand about how the brain generates and uses eroticism for healing. The first one is called resolution, and the second one is called repetition with agency. Now, you don't have to remember these, but I'm going to explain them in more detail and give you some examples. So, for resolution, this is where we get turned on by experiences that feel opposite to whatever formative wound our brain has decided needs soothing. And this is the easiest one to understand. You can imagine, for example, a child who might have felt very controlled or manipulated by their parents. And as an adult, one resolution pathway in their sexuality may be that they feel most erotic when they are feeling free. And this one is an easy example for me because this is my primary one. And folks like me crave experiences, or maybe even just a sentence from a partner or an imagining in my mind where I feel freedom. And that can happen in all kinds of ways, right? Another example of a resolution pathway might be a person who felt rejected by the hot kids at school as a teenager. And as an adult, they really crave feeling wanted. And that helps them access their arousal. It could be a partner saying something like, I just want you so much right now. Or it could be having someone just tear at their clothes, right? Another one might be somebody who was expected in their family to be the good boy or the good girl, but they didn't feel like they were ever quite good enough. And as an adult, they love feeling praised. So this person might deeply want to have someone tell them what to do, like maybe go stand against the wall and take off your clothes, and then praise them when they do it right. And it makes a ton of sense in that way, right? You can see the resolution of the wound. And it's a lovely way to support our own emotional needs through erotic adult play. So there's almost an opposite emotional experience, right, that happens. The other pathway into our erotic emotions is called repetition with agency. And this one can be more confusing for a lot of people because some of the emotions seem on the surface to be negative. But this pathway is also really lovely and can be really empowering and important in human sexuality. So repetition with agency is where we have either in a fantasy imagining in our mind or in consensual adult play, we have an opportunity to repeat the experience of a difficult emotion, but in safety with choice, or in relative safety with choice. If maybe it feels good to not be 100% safe, right? So first off, know that any fantasy in our mind, our imaginings, right, are inherently in our control. Your mind is always aware of the fact that no matter what is happening in your imagination, you are in control, right? We can change people's outfits. We could make them do something different. We could turn them magically into somebody else, right? We could make them put rubber ducks on their head. We could rewind the scene. I mean, we can even manipulate time itself in our fantasies, right? So we are always in control, no matter what the scene is, even if there's an illusion of not being in control. So there's an inherent choice and safety in that. And that means even if you have an imagination that shows you scenes of, for example, you experiencing non-consent or getting abducted or having sex with 12 aliens. Your mind knows that you are safe, and it doesn't actually mean that you want whatever is happening in your imagination to actually happen in real life. Okay? So the imagination is always this sort of sacred space of choice and agency for our erotic mind. Now, if you do desire to play with the repetition of challenging emotions in real life, there's also consensual adult play with trusted partners, right? And especially if you've negotiated how you're going to do that with safe words and things like that beforehand, there's also a sense of inherent safety and choice there. So some examples of a repetition with agency pathway could be for somebody who felt maybe terrified of being humiliated or actually really humiliated in a formative experience. And as an adult, they get really turned on by feeling humiliated when they've chosen it. This is super common, very normal, and it actually makes a lot of psychological sense. Some other examples might be helplessness, weakness, feeling overpowered, feeling fear. But feeling any of these kind of quote unquote negative emotions in a situation where there's some sense of agency, either in fantasy or real life. And you get to decide based on what feels safe and good to you. So those are just some examples. They can be really powerful turn-ons, even if we sometimes think of them as negative emotions. And because of that, they can be really confusing to people when they realize this is what turns them on. And it's actually very normal. It's not weird at all. And just to allow yourself to gently inquire with curiosity, right? Curiosity instead of judgment. If you can do absolutely nothing else for yourself in the realm of sexuality, but approach yourself and your partners with curiosity instead of judgment, you will be well on your way to having a giant improvements, leaps and bounds in your sex life. Okay, so when we get to how to find your own core desires and erotic emotions, right? I want you to remember to ask yourself gently, what is it that I want to feel in this situation, right? So we don't get distracted by the scene that we're imagining, but we really focus on the feelings. Okay, so everyone has emotions all the time, whether we're aware of them or not. And the less aware we are, the more we're really reacting unconsciously. So it's always more empowering to be aware when it's possible. And it doesn't mean we can control our emotions, but we can often sort of gently guide ourselves to process the feeling in our body, especially if they are scary. And when it comes to erotic emotions, we may very well not have any control about what emotions really turn us on. We, in general, between me and all the colleagues I know, we haven't seen any evidence that people have control over what really turns them on. But we can control how we choose scenarios to support our eroticism. And even if some of them feel out of the kind of quote unquote norm, there are always ways to play them out with consenting adults. And that's actually what the beautiful world of kink is all about, right? It's finding ways to feel the feelings you really want to have in safe containers with other consenting adults in play. So whether you identify with being kind of kinky, or you're curious about it, or you don't at all, it doesn't matter. It's okay, right? It's all great. And knowing about your own erotic emotions can be powerful for your ability to connect with yourself and with others. So we can just celebrate that knowledge and use it to support ourselves and each other. So I do want to offer one caveat here, is that even if you learn your own erotic emotions, it can be incredibly vulnerable to share them and allow yourself to go very gently, even with trusted partners. It's a really great gift for intimacy to share the emotions you want to feel and say, hey babe, I learned about myself that, my core desire is to feel really welcomed by my partner. And here's something I would love you to say to me. Would you be willing to do that? So that can be incredibly powerful for building intimacy and for getting what you want. But you don't actually have to ever share these insights with anyone. And if you don't feel ready or you don't want to, there's great ways to use this knowledge for yourself, to increase just your own empowerment and your own satisfaction and your self-pleasure. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. But I did want to let you know that you don't have to sort of jump in to the deep end of sharing them if you don't feel comfortable. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you find your own erotic emotions? So everyone tends to have, most people we find have about 2 to 5, just a handful. And everyone's different, and it's all okay, right? You don't have to have the same ones as your partner to have a great sex life. And actually, if you don't have similar ones to your partner, it's really good to know, because it can help you learn to kind of overcome some easy disconnects and communication that can happen when we have assumptions about what somebody wants based on what our own wants are, right? It can help us find a better common language around our desires with our partner once we actually know these things. But they don't have to be the same. And once we uncover the differences, we can figure out how to put our desires, our core desires, together in ways that can be creative, so that they can be compatible, which is almost always possible in some way. So I want to invite you, when we're going to think about how to find your specific erotic emotions, your core desires. And I want you to start by thinking of a peak real life experience or hottest fantasy when you felt the most aroused you've ever been. And you can remember the scene, the setting, how it smelled, how it felt, what everybody was wearing, right? How you felt in your body. Really let yourself sink into the imagining of that either memory or memory of a fantasy, right? Play it out for yourself in your head like it's a movie. And if you don't have an experience like that, this is okay. You just need to spend some time in self-pleasure land, imagining different little sexy scenarios for yourself and getting creative and trying things on until you figure out what's most exciting to you. And, this can even be a non-sexual but somehow deeply erotic scenario. For some people, it's like an experience in nature or a sensory or spiritual experience even, or something like a flirtation where they felt just the most aroused ever. Okay, so just imagine that scenario and then really dial down and really feel it. Feel all the things that you actually felt, trying to identify a few key emotions in this scene. Okay? And you're just going to want to jot them down. those emotions. Now remember, emotions are we have one word descriptors for them. And if you need help identifying what your emotions are, I have a cheat sheet for you. It's called the Wheel of Erotic Emotions. And it doesn't have every single one possible on it, right? Because it would have to be the size of a hot air balloon. But it does have a lot of different emotions, a lot of different common erotic emotions. And you just go to my website. It's laurajurgens.com. So LauraJurgens.com/wheel. And you can grab that. It's a free PDF, really easy, handy to see what are a lot of different erotic emotions that can help you identify yours. Okay. So one extra note here is if you're a person who is socialized as a woman, remember that there are these formative wounds, right, that underlie a lot of our eroticism. One of the ways that we can get them is through social wounding. And that includes being threatened with things like sexual assault through a culture that depicts and normalizes violence against women. Okay? So if you're socialized as a girl growing up, you knew that violence against women was out there and there was a threat of sexual assault. And many of us, of course, including me, actually experienced it. But at the same time, when we're socialized as girls and women, we are told by society that we are not allowed to be sexual beings. That not only is it not safe, but if we even want sex by our own choice and consent, that's not okay. We're shamed around that. We're called sluts. There's a whole mess of cultural messaging around it. So because of all that social shaming, what happens, very understandably from a psychological standpoint, but really confusingly for lots of us strong feminist women, you may have some fantasies that involve you experiencing non-consent. But remember, your brain knows that this is fantasy and that you are always in control. So what I typically see with clients is, this is just so super common, and women tend to be really ashamed about it or have all sorts of repressions of it. But what's often going on is that fantasy is a way of giving ourselves permission to actually enjoy or experience sex. And fantasies with non-consent, it's not our fault that we're having sex, right? We can give ourselves permission to have sex because the choice is, quote unquote, in an illusion, taken away, right? So it's not our fault. It's a way of giving ourselves the erotic emotion of permission to be sexual. So there can be other erotic emotions underneath non-consent fantasies, but this is a really common one, is it's a sense of permission or freedom in some ways because what's happening is not our fault. And because it's in fantasy, our brain knows it's safe. It does not mean at all that we want that to actually happen in real life. Okay, this is just so common and women are so freaked out about it that I want to make sure to address that today. Okay. So I want to invite you, when you're doing these reflections on your peak experiences or most arousing fantasies, to really think outside the box and question the emotion that you are really wanting to feel. Don't get too wrapped up in what's actually happening in the movie, in the memory, right? That you start assuming what that emotion might be. And be really careful that you're not assuming based on how you've been socialized. So, for example, many women will assume that they want something around being desired or feeling sexy or something like that. And it could become completely the opposite of that. You could want to punish someone. That could be your core desire. it could be all kinds of things, right? You could want to feel in control. You could want to feel liberated. You could want to feel rebellious. You could want to feel transgressive. You could want to feel all kinds of emotions. So don't get wrapped up in what you think you might want to feel. And, a lot of people socialized as men are going to feel, kind of subconsciously that maybe they should want to feel dominant or in control, but they actually don't. They really want to feel surrender, or they really want to feel cared for, right? So allow yourself to really open your mind to the possibilities, explore what your fantasy is offering you, and just, remember to get curious. Okay, so what do you do with this information now that you have it? And you might refine these sort of emotional themes you found as you continue to explore. And you may find some new scenarios that feel really wonderful to you to help you get them. A big way to use these new core desires of yours that you've uncovered, they're not new, right? But you just uncovered them, is to support your self-pleasure time through really great fantasy scenes that you get to conjure. Another big way to apply it is to help you figure out what to ask for from your partners. So, for example, I like to feel free is one of mine. So, I often will let somebody know, hey, I actually really need you to be okay when I say no to something that I don't feel like doing, because it helps me feel free to say yes when I know there's no obligation or kind of emotional baggage about my no. I also really love feeling anticipatory. So that's like if you really dig anticipation, right? The emotion is anticipatory. And that means I can guide a partner to maybe pause a little bit before they touch me just a few inches away, right? Just give me that sense of anticipation. It's also just so important for us to all be able to figure out how to ask for what we want. And it's okay if it takes some practice to do that. I help people with that all the time, so it's also okay if you need some help. But one of the things that we can kind of pattern we can get into as adults is we sometimes expect our partners to read our minds. And that's great if you want to be really disappointed over and over again. Because in reality, no one can read our minds. And, I used to have this emotional fantasy that my partner would be able to read my mind. And that never worked out well for me. It doesn't work out well for pretty much anybody. People don't magically know exactly what to do to make us feel loved or turned on or amazing all the time. And even if it's a partner where we've asked for something multiple times, they still might forget, or they may not know exactly when we want it, right? So knowing our own core desires can allow us to take charge of our own needs and ask for what we want so we can actually get it. And it feels great to get it, even when we ask for it. I had this imagining in my, teens and 20s or something, where I thought that if I had to ask, it wouldn't feel as good when I got it. But that's actually not true at all. It still feels really great. And in fact, it feels even better because the person's actually giving it to you because they know that this is something that you want, right? It's not an accident. And I'm not putting all this pressure on my partners anymore to sort of magically read my mind. Okay. So I am so glad that you are here today. I hope this has been useful to you. We are going to be doing some listener Q&As. So if you have questions about this or about your core desires and what you discover, feel free to send me an email, laura@laurajurgens.com, with your question, and I will try to get to as many as I can on the podcast soon. And don't forget to go to laurajurgens.com/wheel to get the free list of erotic emotions to help you out. And I will see you here next week. If this podcast was helpful for you, please consider going to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leaving a 5-star review. Not only do I really appreciate your time doing that, but 5-star reviews really boost the show visibility, which helps people just like you who need it be able to find it. Thank you so much. I'll see you here next week.